Take care.
Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. This is the October 23rd. It's a joint study session with the cities of Littleton and Englewood. And because we have a whole new group of people around the table this evening, we will go ahead and run around the room, tell us who you are and what you do. I'm Debbie Brinkman, Mayor of Littleton.
Thank you. Is that on?
Yes.
I'm Randy Penn, Mayor of Englewood.
Gary Sears, City Manager, Englewood.
Charlie Boston, Public Works Director, Littleton.
Bruce Solomon, Littleton Council at Large.
And Phil Cernanek, council member with the City of Littleton.
Peggy Cole, council member at large, Littleton.
Joe Johnson, Englewood, District 1.
Tim Westler, Englewood, Mayor Pro Tem. Rick Gaines, Englewood, Director of Public Works.
Sarah Reese, Brown and Caldwell, consultant to Littleton Englewood Wastewater Treatment Plant.
Jennifer House with Hill and Robbins, special counsel to the Littleton Englewood Wastewater Treatment Plant.
I'm Mary Gardner, environmental compliance manager for Littleton Englewood.
Dennis Stolten, manager for Littleton Englewood.
Stu Fonda, Director of Utilities for Englewood.
Wendy Hefner, city clerk for the City of Littleton.
Jerry Baldey, City Council, District 2. That's our northeast portion of our city.
Bruce Beckman, City Council at Large for City of Littleton.
Rick Gillett, Englewood City Council, District 4.
I'm Jim Taylor-Hood from City Council District 1, which is this area.
Dan Grotzman, City Attorney for Englewood.
Jill Wilson, Englewood council member at large.
Bobby Caston, council member at large.
Kirsten Crawford, city attorney, Littleton.
Any manager, Littleton. Well, thank you all for coming this evening. I thought I would just quickly set the stage, and then I'm going to turn it over to Stu. But we've got basically two agenda items this evening to give the joint councils an update on where we are with the wastewater treatment plant, primarily in the regulatory status arena, and then there have been some questions, I believe, from both councils about the option around nutrient trading, which had been a topic of discussion at the Colorado Municipal League Annual Conference. And then we'll get an update on the status of the Humane Society of the South Platte Valley. But really within the regulatory status update, we're going to focus on Reg 31 for a moment, talk about Reg 85, what's currently happening based on some state action on Bar Milton, talked about some of the preliminary cost estimates that we've been coming up with, because as both councils are well aware, we had to adopt sanitary sewer fees, and so you guys have, I think we've completed it, I think you guys have as well. Gary's nodding his head. And then talk a little bit about the long-range plan and a few other miscellaneous items as well. So it's primarily an update, but please jump in with any questions that you have. It's almost all good news. In fact, I think it's all but probably Reg 85 is good news. So I'll turn it over to Stu. Thanks, Stu.
Yes, he stole some of my thunder. Also, Mary Gardner will talk about arsenic, and Sarah Reeves will do a presentation on nutrient trading. So with that, I'll turn it over to Jennifer Hunt to discuss Reg 31 and 85 status.
Hello, everybody. Thanks for having us here today. As you probably all will recall, we participated in hearings with the Water Quality Control Commission on the nutrient regulations, you're referring to already as Regulations 31 and 85, which are going to regulate nitrogen and phosphorus. We had some success on Reg 85, and Dennis Stowe is going to talk a little bit more about that. We were successful in getting them to raise the limit to which we have to treat. We also lent our support to legislative efforts to slow down the process and give us more time to consider costs and benefits and find funding sources. The governor's office did finally weigh in, but only to the extent that we got another year until the effective date of Regulation 85. The state did hold an additional hearing. Now the effective date of Regulation 85, which is the control regulation, is July 1st, 2013.
that means the standard will not be included in permits until after that date. Our permit, the Littleton Englewood plant permit, is up for renewal in 2014, but will likely be acted on a couple years later than that, given the schedule that they usually follow. Regulation 31, the basic standards are not going to be effective until 2022, so there isn't much to do at this point. We have some time. So the staff, Dennis and the other staff, are going to talk a little bit more about the positives that have come out of this process and where we sort of are on the ground.
You heard about Regulation 41 being delayed basically 10 years from now, so we'll talk about that. But Regulation 85 was originally proposed by the Water Quality Control Division to have some effluents that were pretty reasonable. Overall, phosphorus was going to be 1 milligram per liter, so we'd have to internally discharge about 3 milligrams per liter, so we'd have to remove about 2/3 of the phosphorus in Regulation 85. Nitrogen was proposed to be a 10 milligram per liter number, which is still fairly reasonable, but there were some arguments made to the commission which they accepted, and they actually adopted a 15. So instead of a 10 moving forward with Regulation 85, it's 15 milligrams per liter. And what that means, we don't have to build as much facilities to meet that 15, and our operating costs are going to be lower than it would have been to meet the 10. So you see the numbers, if you think the numbers have been moving around somewhat, they have been, because the regulations have been adopted in a way that was different from their original proposal. So we're moving ahead with that Regulation 85. As Jennifer mentioned, we expect that to be implemented in our permit. That's going to be renewed probably in 2016 and 2017. The state will give us a compliance schedule to build facilities, which will probably be somewhere in the range of 4 to 5 years beyond that. And then we'll be responsible for operating those facilities. So that's the basic story on Regulation 85. As Jennifer mentioned, becomes effective next July, but it doesn't affect us until our permit is issued. Going along a similar track is the Bar Milton watershed total maximum daily load study that we've been involved in for 7 years, I believe.
Sure. Dennis, before you change the subject, just a real quick question goes back. As we looked at grade adjustments, we had a time frame for implementation and a cost estimate that went along with that. Is that consistent with the requirements as we understand them today?
Yes.
So the Bar Milton TMDL, and it's a total maximum daily load, or too many car lawyers, take your pick on that, is moving along a similar track. The Watershed Association had proposed a TMDL that was what's called a phased and adaptive approach, which means you have more time to get things done. When that was turned into the division, because they're the ones responsible for finally writing a TMDL, they changed that to a phased and adaptive approach to basically end of pipe. So what we would need to do at the facility is meet a very low number, 0.1 milligrams per liter of phosphorus, at our discharge, instead of a higher number that would have been around a half to 3/4 of a milligram per liter. With Regulation 85, what we're trying to do now is incorporate that regulation with its limits of 1 and 15 into that TMDL, so that would be our first step in complying with the TMDL requirements. What that means is 85 and TMDL would then be on a similar track. We'd be doing one thing as we move forward with the wastewater treatment facility. The cost to do that, I'm sure you've heard numbers in the $60 to $80 million range, and I'll just point out that those numbers were 20-year present worth numbers, so that would have been the total cost expended by the cities to operate the wastewater facility for 20 years. Now that we know what we're shooting for, we've come up with an estimate that's $15 million as capital construction, and the cities split that 50-50 when that comes about. And the operating costs will be about $2.5 million a year. Split that cost almost 50-50. That cost would be proportion to each city in the service area based on the proportion of flow that is donated to us from each city. Currently, that's about 46% for Littleton and 54% for Englewood.
So those costs would probably start to take effect in 2017. And if I was really good at projecting things like this, I'd be doing a lot better in the stock market. So those dates are approximate because we are subject to the whim of the Water Quality Control Division. So now that we know what's going on with nutrients and we have some good information on some other issues, we think this is a really good time to develop basically a long-range plan for the facility going out 15 to 20 years. We have an original plan that we completed in 1989. Both cities were involved in approving that plan. It's been updated 2 or 3 times, but since we have a plan that's over 20 years old, we thought it was time to do a new long-range plan and incorporate all the things that we know of now. So we're starting that process in a few months. It'll take a little while to get done, and then we'll have a much better answer as to how we're moving forward with the issues that we're facing. And that's pretty much all I had, so if you have any questions.
Dennis, I guess the basic question I've got is, I understand your numbers, and I think we've sort of had some of these conversations before. And in an absolute sense, the dollars have come down, which in some respects is a good thing, but to me it sort of ends up being a little bit of a false positive by virtue of the fact that that's all fine and dandy, but I still am extremely skeptical that the solutions that are being forced upon the plant are going to solve the problem they're intended to solve. So I guess before we spend $15 million of CapEx and $2 million per year of OpEx, which admittedly is a smaller number than we thought we were going to potentially have to spend, I assume we're not convinced that they're really solving the problem, and my ultimate question is, how do we continue to push back and basically say, we don't think it makes any sense to spend even that kind of money on a solution that doesn't solve the problem at Bar and Milton?
I'm sure you're familiar with the CNC, the Colorado Nutrient Coalition. Do a lot of work on the nutrient criteria themselves. Nothing to do with Bar Milton, but just the nutrient criteria. And they made all the arguments, a lot of the arguments that you just brought up, plus a lot more about the science and affordability and those issues. The Commission took those issues under advisement during the hearing process and decided to adopt nutrient regulations. That coalition has done a little bit of work after the hearing, but as far as I know, there's no activity in the coalition itself to proceed with some kind of litigation. And we're keeping track of what they're doing, because if there is some movement in that direction, we'll certainly let everybody know. But the desire has been not to, at least been expressed to me, is not to pursue any litigation as a sole agency. We would do the concert with someone else.
Right. Well, and I guess I'm not going to, I'll speak for myself. Everybody else can chime in or not, but we sort of asked our staff to parallel process. We understand that we can challenge and we may have to, and we may lose a challenge or multiple challenges. And I get that we need to do the engineering, we need to plan, as you're suggesting, for a potential eventuality that involves having to spend this kind of money. But I guess I'm still very enthusiastic about hearing that parallel path that says, here's what we're going to do to challenge the ruling. I question in my own mind whether, I don't think that it's necessarily right that the state can just say, boom, you're going to do it, and we say, great, thanks for letting us try to convince you that we shouldn't do it. So I remain interested in hearing what alternatives we're going to pursue at some sort of tactical level with milestones and so on and so on to try to say, great, we'll plan for the worst case, but we'd like to get some alternatives that we can push for.
The Interim Water Resources Review Committee at the legislature had a meeting that I tested, informal, it was a committee meeting, but I'm not sure if I tested it, but described the issues that we're facing. And I was there on behalf of the Wastewater Utility Council, a statewide group, not just in Englewood. And the committee was very interested in the cost issues for building and maintaining that infrastructure. and they gave permission to draft a bill along those lines. But that's as far as that committee took that issue. So there may be some legislation.
When was that?
It was earlier in September.
Dennis, and I don't know, Jennifer, you can chime in too on this, which is coming out of the pipe and what happens at Barn Milton. You know, there's a little bit of geography that's different, and there's a lot of other contributions, including groundwater, that comes in that nobody's treating. Are people thinking this through? There seems to be a little bit of a disconnect because you can get to zero at the water and it may not solve what's happening at the reservoir. I mean, you can get to zero at the pipe.
You are correct.
Okay. But the next part is recognizing the illogic to put the pipe at requirements that we'd have to find some magical thing that's going to actually take some of the nitrogen out or whatever. So I don't understand.
Yeah, the TMDL itself is phased and adaptive. If you want to spend a couple of hours, if you're really bored, we can go through that. But what that allows you to do is take steps toward complying with the water quality standards. In this case, it would be at Water Lake. And we're trying to work that through. And that's where other sources of nutrients would be taken care of. There are plans to do best management plans in some areas of the metro area, as well as in-lake and in-canal treatment, reservoir management possibilities to try and manage nutrients in the reservoir itself. So that whole suite of options is included in the TMDL as an implementation plan. But the first step, the consultant that did the work on the TMDL was pretty firm was very firm that the point sources have to be taken care of. And then we work on the non-point sources to correct the rest of the problem.
When does something come into play, and I don't know how it happens, where folks realize that some of the point source contributions could be zero and there's not a whole lot of difference that is made?
The point sources, the major point sources could be driven to zero, and again, according to the consultant, the lake would still have impairment. Right. The non-point sources would also need to be taken care of, and that's included in the TMDL. I will point out that a lot of those non-point sources there's no requirement for them to do anything. Right. It's a voluntary effort. There are some sources besides the wastewater treatment plants that are required to do some things. But just straight non-point source would be a voluntary effort on whoever those sources are.
We'd be happy to do voluntary effort too.
Dennis, some of the partnerships that we're looking at working with, can you speak to them at this time and who's kind of leading that charge, or is anybody leading that charge as far as trying to pull a coalition together to go against some of this?
There's basically two fronts, and I'll address the one I think you're probably talking about is proceeding with opposing the regulations as they have been adopted. That's the Colorado Nutrient Coalition, and I'm not aware of any activity now that would lead to a recoalescing of that coalition to do something in the future. We haven't heard anything.
Yeah, I'll just say that it appears that given some of the positives that came out of the changes in Reg 85, people are working on trying to work within those rules now and focusing on that. There does not appear to be very much interest in doing some kind of expensive litigation to try to challenge them, given that there was a slight victory in Reg 85 and Reg 31 is so far out in the future. And it's sort of difficult to predict how that will actually be implemented or if it will actually be implemented given the timetable.
And Regulation 85 has a delayed implementation date of a year, but when you're looking at some of the things that you want to be talking about, you need to start now. But we haven't heard of anyone else who is starting that effort. I guess the second issue would be environmental and TMDL. We're working pretty closely with Denver Metro and Centennial Water and Sanitation District, and that Ron Hendricks is here tonight. So if you have any questions of him, if I don't have an answer, I'm going to point to him. We are working closely to get Regulation 85 actually adopted into the TMDL. We believe there's a lot of benefit to that. We're meeting with the state this coming Monday to lay out a roadmap to get that done. We've had one meeting with the state already where they've indicated that EPA and the Water Quality Control Division are open to that change in the TMDL that the division proposed. So we're hoping to be successful, but we're pretty sure there are some other parties that might oppose that. So we're working to try and get that done.
I would add too that I know Councilman Taylor was at the last CML policy meeting. We had a presentation by the Colorado Clean Water Coalition, which is primarily, not primarily, but it's currently focused on stormwater and some EPA rules you could have. It's again one of those one size fits all on the national level. But it's primarily funded currently from Douglas County, and then ex-mayor Ed Tower is their face in making the presentations right now. But when I spoke to him afterward, it's also dealing with points source discharge as well. And so I think it might be another one. It's only in its infancy right now, but Mayor, that might be another place that we can join. I'm in the process of scheduling a study session for Littleton, and I can pass the information along to Gary as well, so you guys can get it. But again, it's a new one, but it's another threat, if you will, in that same arena of discharge.
I just wanted to be clear on what Phil was saying, and that is that at our discharge pipe, we're at zero. We dump into the Platte, and as the water moves down the Platte, and there's incoming stormwater, Cherry Creek, everything else, public service, all these other things. And by the time it gets to one of the lakes, is it better than it is right now? Will it be better than it is right now? And then just kind of following up with what Phil was saying, and I don't want to be saying, hey, gee whiz, shouldn't these other people be regulated, or cities and municipalities be regulated on their stormwater, certainly. But Phil, is that basically what you're addressing there?
Well, it seems to get, I'm not suggesting regulation for
No,
others.
I understand.
I think what they're trying to do, though, is they're trying to say, hey, we have these places where there's repositories of water, and we have some treatment that's there, but the contribution that comes from the treatment plants, if we were at zero, it does so little to address what is perceived as the problem that, to actually get to something that's going to be more acceptable at the reservoirs, we'd have to be doing, we'd have to be putting some magic in the water that gets other stuff out of there from our pipes. And it's probably most of the folks in the room understand that adaptive management doesn't give us a lot of warm fuzzies.
And it's my understanding that once we get somewhere past Evans, that water is the same in the Platte as it was prior to coming in, or on the upstream of the plant.
Well, in some cases, we would like to think that.
Yeah.
In some cases, we like to think that we've improved the river, because that's actually what happens in some cases. But as far as nutrients are concerned, phosphorus is going to stay pretty much the same. Once our effluent mixes through the river, it's not going to be taking up too much in the river, so it's going to make it down to Bar Lake. Nitrogen is a different issue. That reacts in the river, so there'll be some reduction in the nitrogen levels. as the water moves out. But again, the consultant who worked on the report was very clear that unless the point sources are taken care of, there won't be progress toward improving water quality in Bartlett. So part of part of what we've been trying to do is make sure that all of those other parties that want to remain nameless are brought into the association and obviously held accountable for getting the job done that they need to do also.
Part of this, I think, this discussion goes to the whole nutrient trading issue that we're going to talk about. I don't know if that's the appropriate time to move to that, but I mean, part of that was actually just to take a look at where we are along the river stream and how that affects Bar Lake, and that's, I think, what you're going to get into, Sarah, in a couple minutes. So, I mean, does that dovetail? I mean, is a good starting off point to take it to that next step?
We've got a councilman.
Just to think of this a little differently, we're basically asking the taxpayers within our district to pony up a certain amount of funding for this, because there does not seem to be another source, to deal with an issue that other taxpayers in Colorado are not having to do. And yet the outcome of our doing it seems to be negligible, and equally negligible is theirs not participating. It's like a disparate treatment or an unequal treatment or an unequal protection of taxpayers, because we're going to ask our taxpayers to pay an absorbent rate if we were to pass it on directly that doesn't exist anywhere else or in reasonably other places in Colorado. There's been some places that have even been given exemptions. I don't understand, if we look at it not from a technical water treatment issue, but from an overall governing issue, I think there's almost a constitutional level violation here occurring. And I don't know whether it's being considered kind of at that more global level, rather than just, us trying to do the best we can at the water treatment plant.
Dennis has been a little closer to what the TMDL looks like on the ground, but and correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that the TMDL is going to address all point sources, is that correct? And so any point source is going to have to meet the same standards. They're not picking out just Littleton Englewood. It is a broader effort. The issue they have is it's difficult, and they have this issue with arsenic, that Mary's going to talk about in a little bit, but it's difficult to deal with non-point sources or just naturally occurring levels, and so it's the thinking is you need to deal with all the point sources and also work with the communities, like Dennis said, and try to address non-point sources as well. But Littleton Englewood is not being, I don't think, being treated differently than any other point source discharger.
But that's not what I had heard up at CML. I'd heard very clearly that there were 3 or so, a certain area in the scale of size or whatever, and that the others were not being addressed. We were, and et cetera.
Regulation 85 has an exemption in it.
Oh, the Reg 85, yeah.
Any facility that is less than, I believe it's 2 MGD. I wasn't worried about that because we're way above 2 MGD, but I believe it's 2 MGD. So any facility in the state that has that capacity or lower does not have to comply with Regulation 85. There are 44 facilities in the state that are above 2 MGD, and those 44 will have to comply with Regulation 85. Which doesn't really answer your concern, because there's a fair segment of the population that will not be subject to Regulation 85, and I believe it's like 20%. I believe the numbers quoted by the division are that Regulation 85 will take care of 80% of the nutrient loading in the state.
And we raised that issue with the commission on Reg 85.
Can I follow up to ask on that? So, but how many of those other places have a place like Bar Milton that's taking water out down there, and we're being held accountable, even if we have, our output is good, but we're still being held accountable, right, if when it gets to Bar Milton. So how many other places have kind of a trip line down several miles down the river that they're held accountable for?
I can't give you a specific answer to a specific number, but there are other reservoirs that are in the same situation as Bar Milton. One that comes to mind is the Fruit Growers Reservoir, which has a wastewater discharge to it part of the year and has impaired for the same kinds of things that Bar Lake and Milton Reservoir are impaired for. There are a number of Front Range reservoirs, again in the same situation, that receive wastewater effluent and are impaired. And Sterling is one, Sterling Reservoir. And I saw a list of reservoirs once compared to there are several other reservoirs. There are several other utilities that are in that the same situation.
But certainly not all of them. So let me ask this, goes back to what a couple people have already asked, but a different piece of it. If we're having major drought, then a lot of the stuff accumulates on the ground, et cetera, et cetera. Then if we get a huge deluge like we occasionally do, and all that stuff flushes into the storm sewers and runs into the river otherwise, is that going to really significantly increase the threat that we're going to exceed what arrives at Bar Milton? I mean, it would seem to me it's kind of like having all your newspapers for the whole year picked up at the same time by the recycle folks, only we're not talking newspapers here. So
I don't have a good answer for you because I try and stay away from stormwater as much as I can. But I do know when you have a rain event like you're talking about, the first 15 to 30 minutes is what they call the first flush. You get a lot of debris loading from that water. Then anything that happens after that is clean going into the rivers. And in the situation with Bar Lake, a lot of that water went in. A lot of the water that you're talking about would end up in the lake anyway, and you'd have the nutrients going to the lake.
But do we run a risk then of violating the limit? And under that kind of circumstance, would seem to me we'd have a pretty high probability.
Don't forget that nutrients don't act immediately. They take time. The algae takes time to grow, absorb the nutrients, and do the things that they do, which is causing the problem with Bar Lake. So it's not an immediate impact. So an event may have an impact, but it would be down. It would be further down in time. But I don't have a good answer for the specific impacts on that.
I was just going to add that it's an annual limit as well, so the limits in Bar Lake or the TMDL that we're looking at is annual rather than like an instantaneous.
Well, then the big spot.
Right, so if you get a big spike, it really just looks at the whole, whatever load or, concentration is coming in on an annual basis, not, instantaneously.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so quickly on arsenic. We do consider arsenic as a positive upcoming change. The division is proposing to make a change of 3 parts per billion for a limit of arsenic. And currently there's a range, and we have to comply with a 0.02 limit. So currently, segment 14 is considered impaired for arsenic. However, it's been proven that nobody can treat to 0.02 as it is. And so next year, the division, I believe the hearing is next year, they intend to propose the 3 parts per billion, and that would take us off the impaired list. So we will be supporting the state on that proposal.
And I think that's it, unless you have any questions. But I guess any more questions, it'd be good to wait till after Sarah's presentation. That might give you some information that would take care of your questions. Sarah?
Okay. I don't know, is this on? I've got a special microphone. Okay, well, so I've got a presentation up here, but I'm happy to take any questions as we go along. If you have something as I'm moving along, you can ask me questions. So I understand that there are some questions that folks have had about what is trading and can we do nutrient trading. So maybe I ought to move over here because this is where my mouse is, so I can switch slides. But anyway, so what I wanted to do is I'm just going to step through, why would you do trading? What is trading? Sort of how trades work, sort of what are the steps, then maybe some of the challenges that we see with trading, and then kind of looking at some of the options that we have here locally for trading, or what are our options here. So, oops. So again, we're going to go through some basics, and some of this stuff you may already know, and you can kind of look at me like, okay, Sarah, I already know this, and I'll just speed through it. It seems like you guys know a lot about point and non-point source, so that's really important when we talk about trading, and I had a slide in here about that, so I'll kind of buzz through that. But the question could be, why would we trade? And the idea is that, as you know, treatment to meet low nutrient levels is pretty darn expensive, and so the idea is that there's other sources of nutrients, like we've just talked about, these non-point sources or other sources that that maybe are not required to be removed. As you were saying, they don't have non-point sources, as we know, they don't have limits, and so they're not required to be removed. So you could go remove those, and that could be a trade. You could use those credits. So, and sometimes it's just cheaper to remove nutrients at those other sources than it is at a wastewater treatment plant. So what is a trade? So it's kind of like, it's a form of exchange. It's buying and selling of credits. And so you might think about this as more of a banking type thing. We actually call it nutrient credit banking. So it's similar to banking, where basically a credit has a monetary value. And so there's a person that's selling that, or say a farmer, let's pretend, that says, okay, I have nutrients on my land, and I'm going to control those nutrients in a way, and I'm going to form a credit, and that kind of goes into the bank. And then you could say, well, I want to go buy that credit, and I'm going to use it at my facility. And so that's how this works. You pay for that trade, or somehow you go put that best management practice in. So that's, you're installing some kind of treatment, or some kind of like on a farm, you might install a pond that catches the water and lets the nutrients drop out, and then, or takes it through a wetland or something like that. I'm just coming up with ideas that you might be able to think of in your head. And so you've got this treatment, you're taking the nutrients out, and you're able to trade that with somebody else. So again, it's sort of a market-based thing where it's worth it to somebody to make that change at the farm, or if you did it within the city here, it would be detention and retention ponds that you've probably seen more in new construction than you would see as retrofits. But that's something you could do in town, is put in detention basins or even treatment facilities that take out nutrients, and that's how you could get a credit.
Question for you.
Okay, sure.
So the farmer who puts the detention pond in, who grants him the credit, and how is the monetary value for the credit ascertained?
And that's a great question, and I have some slides that actually walk us through that, so that's perfect. That I will hopefully answer that question when we come to it. That's a good question. So I will. I don't want to get ahead of myself, though. So the idea of trading is that we have point sources and non-point sources, and then when you do trading, they kind of like to have a margin of safety, because the whole idea is that they can't be sure that everything that you take out here, that it actually works perfectly, and it can be exchanged directly with the person that wants to trade. So again, I told you that we could talk about what point sources and non-point sources are. I'll just review it really quickly, but we've talked about it a lot here. A point source, it comes from a discrete conveyance. So it's a municipal wastewater discharge like we know of. An industrial wastewater discharge like you talked about, public service, Excel, or any kind of stormwater discharge in a municipal or industrial stormwater discharge. And I think some people sometimes think about stormwater as non-point source, but a lot of it is what we call point source because they have a permit, what they call an MS4 permit in municipalities. Your cities have MS4 permits, and they have discrete conveyances, and they're counted as a point source. But then there's non-point sources, and I've got a pretty picture of some non-point sources right over here. So, agricultural return flow, atmospheric deposition, and there is atmospheric deposition of things like nitrogen. Stormwater runoff that isn't part of those other, not municipal or industrial. It could be part of faulty septic systems, further up in a watershed that are not sewered. And then other sediments and things that wash off within even the river itself. Oops, and you know what? I had a little point down here that I meant to make, and that is, again, to say that non-point sources are not regulated under the Clean Water Act. So again, these things are not regulated and therefore are out there for the taking if you, that's why trading for nutrients can sometimes work. So the whole idea is, this is an example of how a trade would work, okay? So here we have an upstream wastewater treatment plant, and I think it's interesting that John's here because we're going to talk about his upstream wastewater treatment plant tonight, but Centennial, Marcy Gulch. But anyway, so we have an upstream wastewater treatment plant, and when you divide up a pie in a watershed, you're going to say, okay, this is how much, and we're going to pretend we're talking about Bar Milton, and we're talking about Bar Lake. And when you said, you've got a certain amount that's point sources, and then we got a certain amount of the pie that's given to non-point sources that we know comes from non-point sources. And then we have this margin of safety. So here we've got the non-point sources, and here we're going to pretend these are all point sources. And so we've divided up the pie, and this part of the pie has gone to this upstream wastewater treatment plant. Now this is all hypothetical. This is not real. So this upstream wastewater treatment plant says, hey, I can trade with Littleton Inglewood who, isn't given as much of the pie for whatever reason. Okay, so this is a perfect setup, and so they're going to say, okay, well, it's easier for us to treat more. And so, say everybody needed to go down to 1 milligram per liter. And they say, but you know what, it's really easy for us to treat down to 0.1. And so what we're going to do is we're going to give you that extra between 1 and 0.1. We're going to give you those extra pounds, Littleton Inglewood, here you go. And that's how it would work. Then they're going to take that piece of pie and give it to Littleton Inglewood. That's the visual or part. We know how to eat a pie, and we know about pieces of pies. What I wanted to show you though is, for instance, for Bar Milton, this is the size of the pie for the current loads to Bar Lake, and this is how big the pie is for point sources, and this is how big the pie is for non-point sources. It's and as Dennis keeps on going back to the consultant, who was not me, who did this. They said, and I'm not saying that they're wrong at all, that, they said, okay, the point sources are the majority. But you can see how large this pie is. Well, the TMDL calls for, this is the amount that's allowed to go into Bar Lake for it to meet the standards in the end. So this is how much, this is like the total load that we have right now. This is the total load we need to have when we're done. When we're done with this TMDL. Do you understand what I'm saying? So, yes?
Well, I understand what you're saying, but that doesn't make any sense. I mean, we were already talking about taking everything out, virtually everything out, and the non-point sources have to be bigger than what's being represented. I mean, who engaged the consultant to do, what consultant was it, and who engaged them to do it?
Dennis, you want to?
Yeah, there was the Bar Lake, the BMW Watershed Association, and it was AECOM.
Was who?
AECOM.
That doesn't mean anything to me, but that doesn't make any sense to me. I don't know what they came up with, but I mean, they had to have some sort of an agenda.
That was straight identification of the loads and designing priorities.
But Dennis, seriously, does that make sense to you? Given what goes on between our tailgate and Bar Lake?
Our effluent contributes over 50% of the nutrient loading to Bar Lake.
I find that astonishing. I just find that hard to believe because we're doing what? What'd you say we're at in terms of the 15 milligrams per liter of nitrogen? So the concentrations in Bar Lake are being driven by the discharge at the Littleton Inglewood wastewater treatment plant when it comes to algal growth?
Our facility, again, contributes, and we're talking about phosphorus at Bar Lake, not...
I'm talking about nutrients, I assume are both nitrogen and phosphorus.
Well, no, this is just phosphorus, actually.
This is just phosphorus?
Bar Lake is just phosphorus.
All right, you're saying we're at 3 milligrams per liter now. So if we cut ours by a third, or by 2/3, I cannot, that does not make any sense to me. I don't know, I may have to look at the data or whatnot. I guess I'll take your word for it, but it just strikes me as outrageous that they're going to say that the entire 90+% of the phosphorus load in Bar Lake is coming from, what, Centennial, Littleton, and whoever else is between us and Bar?
The other wastewater plant would be the Metro plant that doesn't contribute to Bar very much.
All right, so it's us and Centennial.
Well, Excel contributes something into the...
They have a discharge permit, but they don't discharge much in the way of nutrients.
It's still us and Centennial.
They're cooling water.
I'm skeptical. But
So of the point sources on the big pie, that is mostly Littleton Inglewood wastewater treatment.
Centennial.
Yeah. But yeah, as he's saying, about 50% of it is identified as Littleton Inglewood. Yes, and then Centennial, and then the other point sources would be stormwater.
Yeah.
But it's a small, stormwater they identify as a relatively small part.
And all the ag use between Denver Metro and Bar is non-point, and that's basically diddly.
It's a small percentage of the current loading, but when you get to the target where you're trying to get to, then it becomes a larger percentage because the point sources have gone through the removal process.
Yeah.
Please.
Sorry. Okay, so if we can get past it. All right, so yes, I mean, so what I guess the reason this is up here is just so that we understand what amount of nutrients we're talking about here. It's quite a large, I mean, we're talking about more than 10 times difference between here and here. And so in the end, we have this tiny margin of safety, small non-point source load, and then our point sources are much smaller by the time if you go all the way to the end, as Dennis talked about, it's a phased implementation. And so the first step is not getting down to those numbers. The first step is something in between, and I guess I could put a pie up here that's, some portion of this, right? I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, I'm kind of trying to understand what is difficult to understand.
Yeah.
So we're only talking about phosphorus. Is that right, Dennis?
For Bar Lake.
For Bar Lake. The other ones we're talking about.
So we're only talking about phosphorus for Bar Lake. And you're saying the Littleton Inglewood plant contributes 80% of the phosphorus?
No, it's a little over 50%.
A little over 50% of the phosphorus that goes into Bar Lake. Is the phosphorus coming from like laundry detergent? How does it enter our system at that level of concentration, I guess?
Anymore, most soaps, detergents...
Yeah, I thought they had gotten rid of all the phosphorus.
Most of them are very low. They're very low phosphorus concentrations, which means that in a wastewater effluent, where you're not removing phosphorus, the concentration has gone down from what would be a typical 10 to 12 milligrams per liter down to the 3. I use Cascade from Costco, and I think it has 0.6% phosphorus. Very low levels. Now, if you don't like the way that it's cleaning, you can go to a hardware store, buy trisodium phosphate, and do a much better job in your dishwasher.
But I'm just asking, another way to potentially deal with some of this is to, not that it's palatable, but to not have it contribute into the flow that goes into the plant. And so where does it come from?
But a lot of where it comes from is people.
So what are we eating then?
Stop eating it, Phil.
understand. I don't think I'm eating light poles. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So is there, anyway, so I think I made my point here. And, okay, we'll keep on going here. So let's talk about the training steps. And Phil, I think this is a question that you had, so how do we kind of get there? So first you've got to, the three major steps are you're going to try and identify where could this trade come from. Then the next thing is you're going to see, well, will it work? And then you're going to go develop an agreement with that, say, hey, can I buy that from you? How do we work that out? And so the first thing is to look. Here's the deal with trading. You have to look upstream of where you are. You can't look downstream because what we have to do is meet. At this point, we're talking about meeting at the end of our pipe in some way. So for regulations 31 and regulation and 85, those are end of pipe numbers that we're going to have to deal with. And so you can't look downstream for a trade because you have to meet at the end of your pipe. So you're doing this, you got to look upstream. Right now, we don't know exactly how it's going to go, but for Bar Lake, if we go with the Reg 85 numbers, again, it's going to be an end of pipe number. So we can't, it would be, obviously there's more agriculture and more things going on downstream probably that we could trade with than upstream. So that's part of the thing. So you've got to identify an upstream source. You also then have to say, well, does it make any sense for us to do this? Does it cost less, or is it easier to do in some ways? Is it easier to maintain or, politically is the right thing to do? We've got to ask ourselves, does that make sense? And then do they actually have this excess capacity? What could we get out of them? If it only gives us 3 pounds of phosphorus or 3 pounds of nitrogen, that's not going to do anything for us. So we've got to see, and if it's a point source, again, this excess capacity idea is that everybody, for the TMDL or for these regulations, they have to meet their regulation first, and then they can trade with you. So they have to actually go below that idea that I gave you before, the upstream treatment plant. They have to treat down to their standard, and then they can treat further down and trade that extra with you. You had a question?
Can the potential upstream trade involve sewer plants that put effluent into Plum Creek upstream of Chatfield?
For this, in this case, that wouldn't work because Chatfield already has a control regulation, and all the things that they're doing there, they're trading within their own basin. And so those trades, they're not going to be trading with us. They're going to be trading, if they're going to Chatfield, they're going to be trading with Chatfield to make them meet that control regulation. So basically everything upstream of Chatfield, or we basically can only look downstream of the outfall from that reservoir for a trade. So in this case, if that wasn't the case, there might be something to it, but because Chatfield exists and because it has a control regulation and they already had trading set up, that's sort of off limits for us to look at. Okay, so say you've identified a potential trade then. You found something that it makes sense to do it maybe costs less or something. They do have excess capacity. Then you go into modeling and saying, okay, we're going to collect data and just, we have to document how much are they actually putting out right now, because you're going to remove that and you need to document how much that is. And then we have to determine this trade ratio. And this was something, I wanted to put a picture up here to kind of talk about trade ratios. This is, so here's Chatfield, the outfall from Chatfield, and then all the way down there, Bar Milton Reservoir. I just wanted to show you that the way this works, especially with non-point sources, is that if we do something up here to a non-point source and we say, okay, we found 5 pounds, I'm just coming up with, these are pretend numbers, 5 pounds of phosphorus here, they don't allow you to say, okay, well, 5 pounds of phosphorus here equal 5 pounds of phosphorus here, because things happen between here and there. And there's also a question about, whether it's efficient, whatever system we put in here, how sure are we that it's going to work 100% of the time and give us that 5 pounds of removal? So they give you a ratio. It could be 3 to 1, 5 to 1. It's for non-point sources, it's basically never 1 to 1. So you're going to have to actually remove more out of a non-point source than you're going to get credit for in the end. So you have to determine these trade ratios, and it really has to do with how close am I. If I'm going to do something right here and I'm right close to the wastewater treatment plant, ratio is much better because you can show much more clear delivery between here and here. But up here, as you can say, I mean, from here to there, like you say, it gets all mushy. I mean, all these things happen to this stuff between Littleton, Englewood, and Bar Lake. Well, that's the same thing that they apply up here. We're going to do something here, well, they're going to give you a trade ratio between here and here. So that even adds something to it. So not only do I have, if I'm looking for 15 pounds, I'm going to have to get 30 pounds, or I'm going to have to get 45 pounds in order to get my 15 pounds at the wastewater treatment plant. So anyway, I don't want to belabor the point, but, and then we got to find some way to track that trade, to show that something's actually happening, that these BMPs are in place, or we're doing something and tracking it. And then we get into this agreement. And so that's where you'd have to set up some kind of a contract with whoever you're trading with. And then it ends up in your permit. So I'll go quickly through these. So the challenges that we see is that, again, a trade cannot cause a stream standard to be violated. So even the idea is that you can't make a trade and say somewhere downstream, it's just, even if it's a mile downstream, I can't trade with somebody and just say, oh, for this mile, it doesn't really matter. Again, it's making us look upstream. That's why this whole idea that, if we want to do something for Bar Lake and we say, well, we've got something further down, closer to Bar Lake, can we do something there? Well, because you have to meet at your outfall, you can't violate between here and where you do that trade. So it's causing us to look upstream, which actually it narrows what we can look at. I mean, per your question, now we're kind of trapped on one end by Chatfield. We can only look down to the wastewater treatment plant for a trade. Again, we're presuming that there are other sources where pollutants can be removed, so that there's excess capacity somewhere that we can remove, whether that's at the treatment plant upstream of Littleton Englewood, which would be the one I'm talking about, would be Marcy Gulch. That's the one point source that we could look at, or that there's non-point sources that actually could remove, that where pollutants could be removed. Yes?
But there are other plants that would feed into that prior to that besides Marcy Gulch. The plants that feed into Bear Creek, Morrison, Evergreen, all of those small package plants up there.
Yeah. And the one, that is a good point. The other thing is that we have, Bear Lake has a control reg as well. And so that's it's another limiting factor. It's kind of like the Chatfield issue.
Okay.
Again, this is this trade ratio thing, so that's just kind of going back again. That's another challenge, is that you have a trade ratio. Point sources can be 1-to-1 because it's very controlled, and you can be sure, okay, we're putting in that chemical, or you've got a plant set. But a non-point source, you have to remove more pounds than you get credit for. Again, the trades work best when there's a significant difference in the cost of treatment. So the idea is, even if you could go, if we found some trades to make, you would want your costs, you would want it to make sense. So if it costs more for you to do this non-point source trade than to treat it at the plant, that's something you'd have to really pay attention to. Does that make sense? And then I guess one of the big ones is that you become legally responsible for the performance of that non-point source trade. So say you contract with a farmer to do something. In the end, even if they aren't keeping up with their BMP, whatever it is that they're doing, it's in your permit, and you have to meet your permit. If it doesn't work out, in the end, you guys are kind of saddled with that responsibility. So I want to just run through this quickly. These are actual numbers that we can look at. We did a quick look upstream. We looked at point source. Like I said, we looked at Marcy Gulch, and they Centennial sent us their data. We looked also at options for non-point source trading. And I'll go through this quickly. The idea here is, The blue is showing us the amount, this is phosphorus, and this is trading with a point source, for instance, okay? So this is the amount of phosphorus that we need to meet reg 85. So from where we are right now, when we're saying 3 milligrams per liter, down to the reg 85 number, which is 1, that we would need this to remove this much, or we would need this much phosphorus in a trade. When we looked at Marcy Gulch, this is how much they could give us if we took them to 0. And it's because basically what this is going to show you is that they've got very little flow compared to Littleton Inglewood. And then here, then if we said, okay, say we hit reg 85 and we treated at the wastewater treatment plant to hit reg 85, and then we needed to go to reg 31. This is how much more phosphorus we need to remove. And again, this is how much Centennial, the Marcy Gulch plant could give us if we took it to 0. And basically it's showing you that that's not really an option for a point-to-point trade. They don't have enough phosphorus to make a dent in what you're looking for, what you need for a trade. Then doing the same thing with nitrogen. Obviously for reg 85, as Dennis was talking about, that's TIN, it's the inorganic portion of it. So for TIN, this is how much we need. This is how much the point source could give us. Again, a small amount. And then to get down to reg 31, that's how much nitrogen we would need. And that's how much we could get by treating Marcy Gulch to 0. So that's what we found for point sources is that just won't get us there. Not even close. So then now, this is where we actually look for how many acres does it take if we were going to do treatment, or if we were going to look for BMPs and non-point sources. There's 2 different kinds of non-point sources we can look at. We can look at ag, or we can look at developed land. And I'll say there's not a lot of ag land upstream in this small section that we're talking about between Chatfield and Littleton Inglewood, and then you reach out in the watersheds there. There's not a lot of ag land at all. Most of it is developed, so that's probably what we'd be looking at. So this is how much ag land, part of it because of ratios, those trade ratios, plus the effectiveness of removal on ag land and other factors that basically, this is how many acres of ag land we would need. So over 600,000 acres of ag land. And I put the service area on here. It's about 45,000 acres is Littleton Inglewood service area, the wastewater treatment plant service area. So really, that's a lot of acres that you would need for ag land. And this is how many acres you'd need for developed land. We just don't have it. That's to get to reg 85. This is to get to reg 31 for phosphorus. So again, it's just, we don't even come close to having that kind of area. And the idea is that we would have to have BMPs that treat those entire areas, not just some portion of it. You'd have to treat those entire areas, capture all that drainage and treat it. I mean, I say treat it lightly, put in BMPs, but still it's a retrofit. Now this one is all skewed because this is nitrogen, but it's because this number is so humongous. We're pushing almost 10 million acres of land that we'd need to get the nitrogen for reg 31, and that's because nitrogen BMP removals, it's a very small, the efficiencies aren't very good in nitrogen removal from developed or through BMPs, not very good. Treatment is altogether difficult for nitrogen, whether you're doing it with BMPs or at the facility. And this one, I put the numbers down here just so you know, but we're still talking about 144,000, and that there's 72,000 acres that you need here for developed land. So still, basically, it's just not doable with what we've got. So our bottom line, that the concept of trading is ideal for nutrients because it's not toxic, and this is something Dennis brought up, the idea that, it's not a toxic substance. So, you can do trading because where you put it in or where you take it out doesn't matter as much because it's not going to be immediately dangerous. We found that point-to-point source trading was basically not viable because we don't have a point source with the flow that's great enough. Non-point-to-point source trading doesn't work because that land area, again, just doesn't exist. And then that basically, our based on this research, that nutrient trading really isn't viable for Littleton Inglewood. So did I answer your question about how a trade would happen, or are there any other questions that anybody has? Clear as mud? Okay, all right, good. All right, great. Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Does anybody have any other questions? Gary?
Jennifer, you might, one of the other issues that we talked about last year was the governor's mandate of doing this, and a potential challenge to the governor to not require us to do that because of sewer plants that were affected by that. Do you have any comment at all or thought about, whether we should be, what kind of political action we should be taking, to reduce our liability on this, including the governor's mandate?
You're talking about the governor's executive order on, well, there's also a statute on unfunded mandates, and we raised both of those issues before the commission, and as you'll recall, we did support some legislative efforts to try to deal with that. I understand that there is now some movement towards legislation that would look at more funding sources to deal with the unfunded mandate issue, and so I think we should be following that for the time being. But we did send letters to the governor, and the governor eventually did weigh in, but only, like I said, to the extent to ask the legislature to look more closely at costs and funding sources. So at this point, I think we just need to keep following up on those avenues. Dennis has any other thoughts?
Bruce?
Very much appreciate your guys' expertise and efforts. I mean, it's pretty clear everybody knows what they're doing and they're studying this stuff. And I'm not trying to be unpleasant, but the map that you threw up there, to me, says two things. The pie chart says somebody somewhere has said it's our problem and we have to own it. But the map you put up there says that you've got an extraordinarily complex system between the wastewater treatment plant and the reservoir. If you guys, if the people who are scientists in the room and engineers and professionals in this area of expertise, can sit here and tell us that by spending $15 million and, God knows how much money later for the next reg, 831, it will absolutely positively solve the problem, 100% guarantee. I might be inclined to say, all right, fine. If that's an ironclad guarantee, I might be willing to say I can theoretically support it. But I find it incomprehensible that with the complexity of what is on the map, that we're going to spend all this money. And the thing that scares me to death is we're going to get stuck having to spend it. And then in 10 years, somebody's going to come back and say, well, you know what, it didn't solve the problem. So now you get to spend another, pick a number, $100 million to fix what didn't solve the problem we thought it was going to be fixed in the first place. Or another problem like arsenic or uranium or God knows what else will pop up. And this thing, the plant was designed, was originally intended as a wastewater treatment plant for the citizens of Englewood, Littleton, and the districts. And it is being slowly but surely converted into a water purification plant, which it never was intended to be. And the citizens never were sold a water purification plant. They were sold a wastewater treatment plant. For us to continue spending these dollars when there's no guarantee they're going to solve these problems, and they're just going to basically be an opportunity for the state or the EPA to come back and say, we get to spend another $100 million. It doesn't make any sense to me.
But what you're talking about coming subsequently is the Reg 31 things that will happen in 2022.
But Stu, do you think it'll solve the problem it's intended to solve? Realistically?
We have pointed that out, but you're up against a division and a regulatory agency that doesn't care about that.
Well.
And they've been supported by the Water Quality Control Commission, so we're behind the 8 ball in having to do this or be in violation.
Well.
And
I understand we're stuck between a rock and a hard place, but I respectfully submit that that's not a good enough reason to stick the citizens of our cities and sewer districts with a massive bill because somebody's got their head someplace.
And we have been fighting it.
I know.
We've gone, when the legislature was considering the bill, that would have put it down, that got killed. You also don't have total support from the water industry because a lot of them think this is not a bad idea because they have to treat it. One other concept I wanted to throw out is we actually are already a water purification with what we've already done. When we went to denitrification, we have filters on the tail end of the plant now. Right. And that, we're putting out water that could probably be used directly on parks. And with very little extra could go into the drinking water system. It's that good, but the nutrients are still there because it doesn't take those out enough to handle what the Colorado Water Control Division is pushing and the Water Quality Control Commission is accepting as what they're going to require us to do.
And we have to keep in mind also that this is pushed somewhat on a national level.
No, I know. I understand the EPA, and we saw the thing up at CML, the Louisiana lawsuit and so forth and so on. I guess, but ultimately, when we get to discharging Perrier, is that going to be good enough? I mean, that's what we're down to. It doesn't make any sense.
Totally sure. Let me jump in because we've talked about this before, and this is an issue that isn't about our treatment plant staff. This is an issue that,
I agree.
That we need to. So
I'm not trying to.
No, I know they're injured though before you actually kill them. And so I think one of the things, and you and I and the Littleton Council have talked, and Gary and I have chatted a little bit as well, is really putting together the political side of this, because this is a matter of the staff and ourselves as staff responding to the directives from EPA and from the state. And so to the extent that we can work with our local elected officials as well as our national reps, we need to put together a plan of attack, if you will, and how to go out there. And so working with CML, we can do some follow-up on this legislation, and then post-election time, figure out when are the appropriate times, should we meet with our Colorado delegation here, should we meet with them in D.C., and really put together some type of plan to make them aware of this. One of the things we've asked the staff to do for the entire group here is a bullet point and a talking sheet, so that any time that you are in contact with a General Assembly member or a Colorado delegation member, that you can hand it out, you can speak from that, so we can start to get the word out, because this is a long-term conversation. This is not going to turn around. And to some extent, as I can't remember if Jennifer or Sarah pointed it out, it's so far out there that depending upon who gets elected in 2 weeks and 3 weeks and what their appointees do, and et cetera, et cetera. So we definitely hear your frustration, trust me on this, and to the extent that we can take logical and intentional action to usurp the directives, redirect it to Louisiana, anywhere beyond Colorado, we're going to do our best for that. And I think, and working with Kirsten and Dan from Englewood to the extent, and CNC to the extent that there is, or it is an appropriate legal timing to take action in that front, we certainly will get that recommendation from them as well. I think right now, from my understanding, is it's really in the political front, not in the legal front, that is where we can take some action at this point. So
that's right. And I just want to point out that there is the disparate impact issue that was raised earlier, statewide, not so much on the TMDL, but statewide. But there are, was it 44 other large wastewater treatment plants that are in the same boat as you are, so you're not alone. and others are struggling with this issue with their communities as well. And I think that Michael is right. The political arena right now is where we need to focus, and we need to wait a little longer, again, to see how the political situation shakes out.
Well, like I said,
We need to coalesce. If there are other ones out there like that, that's the group we need. I mean,
That is the group we have, and the Colorado Nutrient Coalition was that group. It's just at the moment
No,
they are.
nationally.
Oh, nationally.
I mean, let's go bigger. It's happening all over the country. Some of them, it's probably even more painful. They don't care about Colorado, clearly. They care, it's a bigger scale for EPA and clean water and all of that, that's forcing these down on roads. Let's get that list.
When I said 44, that was 44 in Colorado.
Good. Because that means there's a whole lot more all over the nation. I mean, there's strength in numbers. And if this is coming down in that kind of, I mean, what we're seeing happen here, it's got to be different levels of this all over the country.
But Debbie, the issue is it only is applying to those communities that have very small water flows. When you get back east and they've got these massive rivers flowing through, they're not really concerned about this. But it's the west and the smaller rivers of the west. You can't get into the northwest. You got to be in the real true southwest part, and that's a very small population category. It doesn't have a lot of clout in Congress. It's going to be very difficult to fight.
Reg 85 and Reg 31 are state regulations and are not going to be shared by other states. They have similar issues, but you won't line them up directly to where you could get them excited. And we are behind the 8 ball because the commission has already moved on these things, and the division seems intent on going forward with it. So you can make efforts, but it's going to be an uphill battle.
like I said, I appreciate you guys, and Michael's right, this isn't, you're sort of making the presentation, ergo, you get the response, but it's not certainly directed with malice. But to that point, Stu, then we've got to figure out how to get their attention, and I don't know how that is. But somehow, they have decided they were just going to do what they want to do, and we are either going to get to pay for it, or we're going to have to figure out how to get their attention to address our issues.
To date, Dennis and his group in the coalition have been doing that for the last several years as hard as they can. And it's frustrating to not make more progress than we have. We have made some in that we have, if Reg 85 becomes part of the Bar Lake thing, then we will be meeting costs that are substantially less than we thought they would be.
Right.
Then what's looming ahead is the Reg 31, which is, we don't even know how you treat to that level.
Bingo.
One of the other issues is watersheds adjacent to ours. We've already mentioned Chatfield. Cherry Creek is similar. In Cherry Creek, wastewater facilities have to meet, we were talking milligrams per liter, so that'd be a 0.05 limit for phosphorus. And that's in the Cherry Creek Basin. Chatfield is a little different. They can discharge up to 0.1, a little bit higher. They do things a little bit differently there. But in those two watersheds alone, they are already exceeding the treatment that would be required by Reg 85. So you're facing that situation where something similar to Regulation 85, only more strict, has already been in place in Colorado for, I think, the Cherry Creek situation, that's 20 years.
And their sewer bills are very high.
But the plants are in proximity to Cherry Creek are how close?
They range pretty close to the reservoir down to quite a ways away.
Okay. So, I mean, I get what you're saying.
So I don't know exactly where the phosphorus is coming from. But the other side is, okay, the standards are being met. Who's receiving the benefit of that? You know, what's the counterbalancing side that says, hey, you have to have to do that other than some folks that are way off in Washington that are our friends?
The people who would be directly benefiting from what we do?
Yeah. I mean, assuming that all of this is being resisted, okay, and folks are kind of, putting some friction in being able to address these other than with the warm fuzzy term of adaptive management. Who's on that other side saying, hold their feet to the fire?
Who's supporting these regulations?
Who's the beneficiary?
Yeah, who's the beneficiary
of our spending?
Oh, if you want to, in our situation in particular, it would be Franco, City of Thornton, East Cherry Creek Valley, Aurora Water, anyone who would benefit from improved water quality in the Southwest. If you ask that question to someone in the state, they're going to say that this is a public resource that they're protecting, and that public resource belongs to the entire population of the state.
This gets into the change of use in the water rights of Bar Lake and that system. There's all kinds of water rights battles going on now, but the essence of it is they're changing from agriculture and taking the consumed use and using it with the municipal use for East Cherry Creek Valley, for the communities that are developing up there. And from a water use, now the complexion changes because the farmers didn't used to care about the nutrients that actually helped them. Now they have to use more fertilizer. But the new use for municipal on a whole bunch of that water is putting pressure on to say we don't want algae blooms and these type of issues in our source water. So it's changing as the communities to the north are growing and converting the agricultural water to municipal.
Stu, just for clarification for myself again, the treatment has to be done at the point source or the treatment plant, right?
Yes.
Okay. So it couldn't be done at the intake at Bar Lake, for example.
Well, where they divert is where we think it should be, but that's not what the division thinks. And
okay, just devil's advocate. If that were so, then that would include a whole lot more of the taxpayers of the area, as opposed to just little districts, correct?
well, that's where we wanted it to originally take place, down where to have credit for the river assimilation. But it was not, the division won't go along with it.
Well, and what is the reason for that?
Dennis, did they give you a reason? I've never heard a real one.
Is green on or off?
Green was on.
I had it wrong. I thought you were all wrong. Again, the division's role is to protect waters of the state. They have a set of water quality standards, and they go by that, and that's how they protect waters of the state. In the case of Bar Lake, with the different point source and non-point sources of phosphorus, what they've decided is point sources need to be controlled at the source, and non-point sources basically need to be handled some way. They haven't defined that. What we've tried to do in the TMDL is put a plan together to treat those non-point sources. And when I referred to in-canal treatment and in-lake treatment, that was what I was referring to, is treating someplace that's effective that takes into account those other sources that aren't point sources. Someone asked me what I thought would be a good model for that kind of approach, and my response was let the point sources, it would all be based on pounds of phosphorus, similar to trading, and let the point sources remove as much as they can in a cost-effective manner, and then join a coalition. And I don't know how that would work in the Denver metropolitan area, but then you join a coalition and you pay for pounds of phosphorus removed at the lake. And when you get to that point, everybody's eyes glaze over trying to figure out how you would get that done with the number of jurisdictions that are in the metro area.
It would mean Englewood and Littleton and Sheridan and Denver would somehow have to pay up for the stormwater they put in and whatever that contributes. And you could see that as a political thing.
Well, it'd be the whole metro area, because
Sure.
ultimately it's all coming
Sure, but-
into the plat, right?
There's no strong movement in that direction.
But you guys are basically saying that the Water Quality Division is saying it's a state resource. So why shouldn't it be the state that collects a fee from all state residents to be used to treat water, which is an all-state resource? I mean, if Thornton's getting the benefit of our spending,
Well, it wouldn't
send them an invoice?
Wouldn't be all state, but it would be in that drainage basin.
No, either, however you, yeah, which is probably right. I mean, the South Platte Basin versus the Arkansas or whatever.
Let me speak for Thornton, because I've heard it. Our water would be much better quality if you weren't discharging wastewater.
I mean, keep in mind, we have a permit that allows us to discharge, and that's the control that the state has over us, is the permit.
No, I understand that, but to Dennis's point, you said we're already discharging drinking water. So I don't see how the water quality
Well,
could be any better.
it's high-quality water.
Very high quality. But it still has the that doesn't take out the phosphorus.
It still has nutrients.
And the nutrients. You have to do more to get rid of them.
Somebody has to do it, so everybody has to do it.
Why can't we just pay them? Would it be cheaper to pay them to take stuff out than for us to try to do more?
Because our others are working.
Regulation says we have to do it.
Well, I know, but I'm just trying to look at this. I'm curious why this stuff really hasn't been one of these week-long features in the Denver Post. You know, a whole series of articles on this one. But again, wouldn't it just be cheaper for us to pay the people that are taking water out to drink? Clean it up?
There's more than one water supplier downstream of our facility, so to be negotiating with each one.
Yeah, but I'm still wondering how much that would it actually cost to take it out?
And then we'd be paying for, and I'm just saying, then we'd be paying for installing treatment at their facility and paying them to operate it. And we haven't gone through that analysis, but trying to negotiate those kinds of agreements with a number of water diverters would be, you would need a different personality than mine to negotiate those contracts.
Yeah, no, it's not so much that, it's just kind of the question of how much are they spending to take out what's in there now that has to get out of there?
Would the cost be any different for them to take it out as for us?
No, I understand, and I don't know.
I would guess multiple treatment plants would be more expensive than what we're estimating, 15 million over 20 years, is what you said, Dennis, and
15 per capital.
Yeah, I don't think you'd come anywhere close if you were dealing with a half a dozen water suppliers.
Ultimately, I would imagine you would just have a domino effect, like you said, water plant after water plant after water plant, that you are paying to take that nutrient out.
But that still doesn't satisfy the state.
But I guess what I'm saying is
getting
because,
like,
to answer Peggy's question, it seems that it will go on forever. It'll go on, into the next state and continue on to every water.
And you still have a recreational problem in Bar Lake. Because you haven't solved that, you still have the algae.
I think one of the things we'll do next time there's a hearing, we'll let you guys know, and you can come and talk to them and have this conversation with them, so. So,
Good for every people, and they say no at the same time.
yes.
Michael, I wonder if I might have a comment?
Sure.
Oh, thanks. John Hendrick, manager of Centennial Water and Sanitation District. We are up against the same things that the Bi-City plan is up against.
And we've thought a lot about this issue, and we're not going to change the universe of water quality regulations and how things are handled in the state, let alone the nation. We can try to do that, and I agree, we ought to join forces. We use John Hall, a national attorney in the field. And there is some room, I think, to work on a state-by-state basis. I don't agree with a lot of things EPA is doing to us in many facets of our business and everything else, and wastewater is one of them. But more specifically, what can we do? And we're trying to take a practical approach. We're not going to turn over the health department, but we are going to take off the gloves, but we're doing it with an initial, gentle, cooperative approach, particularly at Bar Lake. I talked to East Cherry Creek. East Cherry Creek has a reverse osmosis process for the water that they pump out of the wells below Bar Lake. So they do treat. They spend a lot of money to take out other things besides nutrients. They're covered. They didn't have any problem with the water out of Bar Lake. It's kind of facetious, but that's the situation. So what do? What we are suggesting we do, and we are working with Dennis on this, we put our heads together, brainstormed this, and said, what can we do to avoid 31? What we can do, and what we will try to do, is to come up with some programs that are already written into the TMDL, which gives this phased approach. I think, and the consultant stated that there are alternatives to improving the quality in Bar Lake by doing some things in Bar Lake. And there's a list of a dozen things that may cost us a few $1 million, but I got to tell you, my district is probably willing to spend a few $1 million to clean up Bar Lake as much as we can, get the pH down below 9.5 and the DO up and the algae down and the chlorophyll A down in the lake. The benefit of that is it's demonstration of goodwill and community cooperation. EPA has got a quote about they will encourage these kind of efforts to improve water quality and improve the recreational uses of those water bodies. If we can do that, show water quality improvements, get it off this 303D list, they call it, that's an impaired water body, I think there's a chance we can go and get some relief, maybe even on 31, but we got to start, I think we have to work on these things in a practical way that can lead to some relief. I think also we'll start again with the legislature. It was very frustrating to go down there and point out the billions of dollars the state is going to spend on these regulations when the consultants can't even show a positive benefit-cost ratio statewide. And you and I are up against this thing down here because I got to tell you, Bar Lake would get a lot better if we did some in-lake things and improved it, dredged it, I don't know, whatever, than spending the millions of dollars we're both going to spend. The consultants say may or may not fix it. You're right, Bruce. It's a risk. I'm willing to gamble on some better alternatives, put some money and some creative cooperation on the line, cross our fingers that the state maybe changes staff, maybe changes philosophy. But I think we got to keep working with these people. We got to keep trying to state our arguments. We got to do a full court press on this. And I'm not comfortable waiting until 2016 and 2022 because that's exactly where we are today. I heard about this 5 years ago. We waited, you waited, and here we are. So I guess I'm urging that maybe listen to Dennis and Mary and some of the other specific things that we're trying to do. The Nutrient Coalition faded. Most people got what they thought they wanted. But frankly, we couldn't get a response to a cash call. We couldn't get $6,000 to pay off the consultants and attorneys we had in the Nutrient Coalition. We had, 60 members, but you and I were funding the major part of that. But we got a lot of that job done. So I urge you to keep up your passion for the right thing. This is the right thing, is to take a stand and say, wait a minute, this is a very inefficient way to use our ratepayer and our taxpayer dollars to not solve a problem, but to spend a ton of money. So I guess my ask is stick with it, be creative, listen to some of the options that we can create that we think are very practical. The legislative route, I think the governor set up a panel to deal with the Oil and Gas Conservation Commission. I think there's a shot at doing something like that with nutrients. This is a statewide issue, and it needs some leadership down there at the Capitol to help us out. But, we're in the trenches, but we're going to do what we can to move this in a favorable direction, and I am very appreciative of your intensity and your support that you folks have given to help us move this process along. Thank you.
Okay. If there's nothing else on this topic, we'll take a 5-minute break, and then those who, we'll come back and talk about the Humane Society, so don't want to stick around for that. I mean, let the council stay. Councils.
All right, let's come back into session, please.
Bruce. Councils. We're reconvening.
Jim, get ready.
Okay. Dennis and Stu are not here because they're interested in the Humane Society. They are here to give us an update on the system plan. Give me the words, operations plan.
And really, all it is that as a staff, we got together and wanted to raise the question. We've been organized a certain way. We think it's running fairly well, but we thought it might be useful now that we've got all the new facilities online. We're a bigger operation. We have a lot more computer and SCADA control systems, and we thought it might be beneficial to have someone from the outside come in and look at what we're doing and see if they could advise us on a better way, any ways to improve our efficiency. We think we have not done that in a long time, and this was just a suggestion for the committee and the councils to consider. We think there might be some fertile ground there. It would be done by someone who is not familiar with us. And that's it. We just thought this might be a good time to consider that, and we would hope it might improve some of our efficiencies, taking an outside look, because the operations got fairly large and fairly complex.
You have an idea of what the cost would be, Stu?
Pardon?
What kind of cost are we looking at?
Don't know. We just are sending up the flag, see if there's interest, then we would contact consultants and get quotes and prices and things like that. And this would dovetail with the master planning we would be doing for the long-range master plan, which would, in my vision, would look at what Reg 85, what facilities would we put there, and how do we integrate them, and look beyond to Reg 31, because you will want to do Reg 85 in the context of Reg 31, because Reg 31 would be so much bigger and more expensive, so you take a look and say, we don't want to paint ourselves in the corner with what we build in Reg 85 and have to tear it down to meet Reg 31. We want to know that the two integrate. And we've been very successful in that type of planning in the past. The one we did in 1989 is still good. And we've saved a lot of money by the way we've always dovetailed by looking way ahead. Part of the long-range plan, as I envision it too, would be to say, when we know those processes, do we have enough land to operate on? And then what would Reg 31 take? And Reg 31 will be a fluid target. Okay.
Phil.
Just to maybe use a little bit different language on some of what you're mentioning, Stu, which is I'm an advocate, because what I understand it is it's kind of taking a look at what's happening at the plant. If I could put some words on it, it's an operational audit that really takes a look. It brings in another set of eyes. I happen to be a person that's doesn't look at audit as a bad word. And saying, hey, let's take a look at it. Part of the RFQ or RFP process will be to find someone who's not familiar with the operation, so they're coming in with a pretty clean set. Now, in that selection and reporting, that would also, a selection would be shared at least with the councils and the reporting and what's made available, because at some level we kind of represent the ratepayers. So trying to see that happens in a good and arm's length way would be something we should be interested in.
Yes.
Any other questions? Thank you. Okay, councils, wanted to give an update on the Humane Society, and I'll go back a bit. I think the last time we talked, we discussed the MOU, and I know your council has voted on it. We, at this point, have the approval of all 9 municipalities and the county. So we are in the process of, based on the MOU, we are required to put together a team of representatives from the municipalities that would then do a study on options, including the Humane Society for service to the communities, and kind of what the depth and breadth of what that looks like. And then that would come back to the group to start making some decisions about. That needs to happen within 6 months from the time that we've got the final signatures, of which we do have. So we're working on putting the schedule, it's like scheduling nightmares trying to get these many people put together. So hopefully we'll have something done, a meeting that happens in November at the latest. So we'll keep everybody apprised of that. There's been a couple of things that have happened at the Humane Society. I would assume most of us are somewhat aware of the board's decision to remove Nick Fisher from the CEO position. That was a very difficult position, but I think that in the long term, the shelter will be able to move forward and in a very positive way be able to do some of the things that they've been struggling with so much in the past. The board, there's at least the chairman of the board has decided, I'm sorry, Bruce, I can't see the council people. The chairman of the board, has determined that she's not going to re-up at the end of the year, so they know that they have at least one board vacancy at this point. They suspect there may be another one. One of their board members has indicated difficulty with time commitment on the board. So the members that are currently on the board, then they are committed and they are working very hard to keep things going. What they have done in the interim is, and those of us who were there 4 years ago when we put the Humane Society back together again, remember Leslie, and I've got her name written down here because I don't say it very well, Maisonneuve. Leslie was part of the original team, and she is a financial numbers person. And she did the setup with the books and all the financials and helped do the planning and that type of thing. I think she left the Humane Society about 18 months ago. She has stayed involved as a volunteer and a donor, so she has kept her thumb on the pulse of the group. They have brought Leslie in, and Leslie is working as a facilities operations. And they are going to, once they get their feet underneath them and decide where their needs are and what they need to do, they'll begin a search for another CEO. Leslie will probably then at that point move into more of a position of a CFO, that being her specialty. The City of Littleton has decided to issue an audit on the Humane Society, and we did this, I think, about 2 weeks ago. It was when Nick was still in office, and the intention was that we have been asking, as you guys have for months, for financial information and spreadsheets and profit and loss and expenses, and never getting anything, but we continued to get requests for more money. The Littleton Council in our budget did not approve their full request. We approved the contract amount of $50,000. So we sent the notice over. It's within our contractual rights to be able to do this audit. And we're going to use our staff to go in there and look at the books. Leslie is being incredibly cooperative, as is the whole board, and they're helping organize the books so that it is an easier job for us. And I think that it will be a valuable exercise just in terms of what we can provide back to the board also and to help them make some decisions. We have already, a couple days into Leslie's job, she discovered that there was in excess of $30,000 of payables that weren't on the books yet. So they've already, over the next till the end of the year, they were showing that they were going to run a little short, and so now that's dinged that a little bit more too. They are being very thoughtful and very cautious about their spending. They're doing a lot more creative ideas and making things work more efficiently. They've called the city. Littleton has offered to do some in-kind repairs, and so we have been fulfilling that promise to them. And they've called on occasion and needed a light was flickering in the cattery, and they were concerned about electrical issues. They called over to the city, and within 15 minutes, we had someone over there, and it was repaired. They've reached out to volunteers to help fix with broken doors and broken locks. They've all rallied, turned out, done it. So they're on top of things, and they're getting a lot of that done. They have had to lay off 2 people. They laid off a volunteer coordinator and their marketing person. Both were part-time positions. But financially, that was something that they felt that they would not be able to support for through the year. Nick's contract he was an at-will, but his contract did allow for a payout, a 6-month payout, and his salary was in the $60,000 range, so they're looking at a $30,000 payout on that. I think the contract does stipulate that he can be paid on a regular interval as though he was still working there, so they don't have to do the lump sum. But they would like not to have to do it at all. The things that would reduce that would be that there was intentional illegal type things or stealing of money and those types of things. Those are highly unlikely, and the effort to pursue some sort of investigation on that is also expensive and probably not worth that. So at this point, they're just trying to figure out how to do this. Leslie is working without pay to help them out. They are looking at creating a number of partnerships in the community, partnerships to help with their spay and neuter clinic, which is a profit center for them, and it hasn't been. But they've got some great ideas going there. They're also working with another person who she brings up animals from the Indian reservations and runs them through spay, neuter, microchipping, this type of stuff, and to work with her and have a partnership there where she could even kind of have an office there and create kind of a good synergy with that. The benefit of something like that is that you get a better mix of dogs, and you also get a lot of puppies, and that is very profitable for an adoption center. I know Randy and I have talked about one of the struggles any shelter's dealing with these days, if you're not in Denver, is you get a lot of pit bulls, and Nick was always a pity lover. So there were, and there still are, and part of it's just because of the nature of what's going on. And so they've got a lot of pit bulls, and then they also have a lot of chihuahuas. So while those dogs can get adopted, in order to keep a good churn of animals and to keep a popular interest in a shelter, they need to have a variety of other dogs. So they have implemented a number of different things, going to the Denver shelters, pulling the dogs off of the death row, and bringing them over and creating a whole, variety of animals. So these are a lot of the things that these guys have started putting in place within the last couple of weeks, which I'm telling you this because I think that it's a positive shift. And the last study session that we had, we talked about why don't they do some of this stuff, and why don't they do more fundraising and do more outreach and do this type of thing. And so the good news is that is really starting to happen. They're creating some quick fundraising opportunities to try to raise some really quick money and without spending any money, and trying to implement those through the next year or next couple of months. And I think that we'll just have to, at this point, wait and see what happens as in terms of how their financials go over the next few months as to whether or not they're able to finish the year in a good place. It may be a situation where they do have to come back to the councils, and we have to make another decision. I'm not saying that's going to happen, but I think it's only fair. They've already warned me, and I've shared that with Randy, that that's the last thing that they want to do, but they also don't want to compromise their services or close. They have vendors that need to be paid, and they're doing the best that they can to make that happen right now. But they may need a little help at the end of the year, because so much of their contract money they don't get until the next year. So it's like just that little bridge between paydays for them. So I think I covered most of it. One thing I did also want to mention is that they did, and I think we talked about this at our study session, that they did buy or are renting the other half of the warehouse. The tenant that was in there left, and Nick went ahead and took out a contract on that. They were going to have a store, a little shop for people to buy collars and kennels and stuff like that after they adopted, and then they were going to have a training in there. That has not worked as planned. Part of the reason is it's not air conditioned, so it was really unusable throughout the summer. And the shop plan just didn't work. The layout is not conducive to that. And most people who are coming into the shelter and getting the dog and that type of stuff, they're not interested in, shopping. They head off to PetSmart and do the big shop. So that's been a struggle. That area, they are looking at removing that from that area, because to try to keep it going would only be cost strain, and then turning that rest of that into more of a training facility. And they are looking at partnering with some trainers in town to do some of that. And training is a huge profit center for a lot of places, to puppy train and obedience train and that type of stuff. So if they can get some of that stuff working and going and happening, then I think that they'll be on the right track. So, any questions, Randy, anything?
I think Debbie covered most everything that we kind of talked about. I think as a council, Inglewood, we have to decide. We did allot $91,000. Littleton allotted $50,000. We can always put that back to back and kind of see what we need to do with that. That'll be up to you guys, your choice and what you want to do with that money, that extra money. But they may come at the end of the year and ask for money from us, so we need to make sure that we're aware of that fact. I think creating the MOA, I'm hoping it does what we need it to do. We don't have a lot of options, so what we need to do is make sure this group is very successful. The problem is, I think one of the people, the hires that they lost, was the one that was doing some of the fundraisers. Probably not doing as many as we wish, but I think we have to continue to encourage the going out and seeking funds, making themselves available. I think we have, with all the people in the MOA, maybe we all set up some time when we invite them to our municipalities and set up different either educational processes or bring puppies or whatever it might do, that we can do that. And then I really agree with, if we can set up things for spay neuter, microchip, I think that's something that's money in hand. And if we can get some partnerships going within all the municipalities in the MOA, I think that would be a huge profit for us. I think the store thing is probably a dream that went bad. I don't know how we can get rid of inventory. I don't know how much inventory we have left. We have always told them that we would send people down from our area. Rick has always been very cordial about doing that. We haven't been called yet. So if Littleton gets in a quandary, then I would ask you to call the city of Inglewood, and maybe we can get down there and assist. So I think it's something that, none of us want to run a shelter again. We've already tried that. We don't want to go to that area again. But folks, we don't have a lot of options, and so we've got to make sure we get this option going correctly. And so, I wish Nick well. I think his heart was there. I just don't think he had the management skills to carry this off. And I think with this new person, hopefully she'll be more financially stable, and we can go from there. So.
Now, the new people that were released, or the people that were released other than Nick, weren't they the same positions that they came to us a year ago and said they were going to hire to enhance their revenue sources?
Yes. So right now, the staff is primarily a kennel staff, and there's some front office staff.
Linda?
With the 30,000 that you discovered recently that do you know what that adds to your overall net anticipation?
No, that 30,000 was payables that hadn't been entered yet, and they know that they had, they've got some debt that is, I think some of it's 90 days, and that's what they're trying to catch up on and trying to deal with. They've got some 45, some 30, and then they found this 30,000.
And in the sort of gift in kind that you've given through service repairs, did that just begin to happen recently, or have you been doing that for a while? Because we had inquired about that, and it seemed like there were closed doors to that. Is this just a new thing?
I can answer. Sure. You know what, Linda, I don't believe they've ever come and asked. I know Debbie and I both went on tours through trying to figure out what we could do. They never stepped out very well and said, we need this help.
I think they said they didn't want it, they didn't want us involved, but recently, though, you have been able to.
Yeah, we did, and Nick
he
put together a list, a honey-do list for us, and it wasn't anything that was urgent. It was, these are things that need to be done, and we did, yeah, we got a little busy over here, and we got a little shorthanded, but we rallied up. I guess we've been over there the last couple of months and got most of that list ticked off. Charlie?
We've done some of the items, and we're still doing some as of this week. So there is some progress being made on the urgent repairs. There were a couple of little things that needed to be done. The rest of it was pretty much get to it when you can. We are working on the list, and we'll complete it.
I'll tell you one of the things that really needs to happen over there, and I don't know how, that it seems to me that there may be a way that the cities can help with this, is that the kennels need to have a in-ground drain system. Currently, they have to clean out each kennel separately. It takes a very, very long time for them to do it. Since we're sewer talk and all that tonight. But you don't have a house full of healthy dogs in there. So you've got scared dogs, nervous dogs, and all of that. And so you have got an ongoing process, and particularly when you get upwards of 30 or 35, 40 dogs. So the current layout of that place, the fact that there are not drains, it does create a huge encumbrance of extra work, and which also amounts to extra money for these guys. And I don't know what the cost of doing something like that is, but if there's a way that we can engineer that, help get that thing done, that would be a huge, huge move forward for this group. Huge.
And that would probably take care of the phosphorus fill, so we would.
Finding out of the sewer utility.
Sorry, go ahead.
Excuse me, there's no drainage system then within the kennels. Is there something that could be put down the middle so you could,
Yeah, it would be like digging a
side
small
and then
canal
drain it?
with a grid.
Right, because I've seen that in kennels.
Right.
But they don't own the building, so that would be.
The landlord told them that would be an approved.
Okay, and then with the other part of the building that's not air conditioned, but they still want to use as training, are they going to have to go in and put air conditioning in there, or is the landlord willing to do that, or?
I don't know about that. I do know that we're glad winter's coming because they can train in there because it is heated. So there is a heater, so they can, and that would be.
Dogs get mad.
Yeah.
So I think that's just one of those things that, making a decision to do something without thinking about what that consequence is. We can't use the room because it's not cool.
Right.
So, and I don't know, there could even be the possibility of renting that back to the landlord or getting rid of that extra space if it's not needed. These are all things that group now is looking at and considering, so.
Would it make sense too, and I don't know if this can be done, is to wait to pay Nick his 6 months until the audit's done?
I don't know by contract what they can do on that, but they are paying it on I think it's every 2 week. So it would be like his regular salary, he's not getting a lump sum.
I mean, because obviously the audit's being done for a reason, so to see what's been going on, and then we'll have a detailed financial statement and all of that. So I just wondered if that happens.
And Mike, you've been involved with this for day one and probably prior to day one. What do you feel the atmosphere is going to be of the board and the new hires? What do you have any sense about how they're going to come about with this new organization?
I'm not sure. I think the fact that Martha Smith has left the board may change their outlook a bit. Have to remember that their mission is, in addition to what they do for us, they're an animal welfare agency. Not that we're not concerned about animal welfare, but they go much further than we require them to go, or state law requires us to go. I'm not sure, and that does impact cost. The question I've always had is, how does the cost break down in terms to the cities that participate in the county? How do those costs break down in terms of the services that we need them to provide legally, they have to provide, we have to provide by state law, versus those that relate to other animal welfare issues? Some of those overlap, and it's real hard to figure that out, but I think maybe if the board is willing to change a bit, at least until they can get their feet on the ground, get their fundraising in place so that they can expand their animal welfare services to the extent that they want to be there. That may be beneficial, in fact, that Martha has left the board.
And our two representatives are Mike and Jill, so you know that they'll be coming from legal. So.
Joe?
Yeah, just a couple of comments. I appreciate the sort of update. I think the mayor sounded like closer to this issue than I sort of have been. But it sounds like we're spending a lot of time talking about their operations and trying to improve their operations, and I guess that's concerning me. Do we have the right partner here? Do we have confidence in this organization? I feel like they've made numerous blunders in their operations, and if we've got willing partners now, shouldn't we at least be having that discussion before we say, hey, we need to get behind them 100%? That Nick and the other board member leaving sort of concerned me. I'm hearing now from the mayors that may have been a timing issue. I guess I understood at some point that was a bigger issue than just not being able to make the meetings, that there was some sort of directional or more larger sort of policy issues underlying there. I have no idea. I'm not saying I do. I guess, again, that just sort of concerns me. And so I guess I'm just hoping for some discussion surrounding that.
Regarding Martha, her leaving, she has been struggling for a number of months with schedule and does not feel as though she's been able to give the Humane Society the time and the effort that it needs. And so her stepping down, she recognizes that position is going to require a lot more time than she's willing to give it. So, and I think, let's just call it what it is. Her and Nick were very close, and I think it'll be difficult for her to go on without Nick. As the chairman of the board, she did not have to vote, so she was able to abstain on that. And I think that Nick was an amazing dog trainer and an amazing animal welfare type of person. He was incredible with that. In terms of what the shelter needed and what we have talked about before, those have been lacking, and getting the details of the books and the this isn't the that. And that's why they brought in a volunteer coordinator, and that's why they brought in the marketing person, because these are things that were just not part of what was happening, and by bringing them in, they saw a little movement. I mean, they got a lot more volunteers, they got some scheduling done better, they got some great promotions that they did, some great fundraising. Now it's a time to reorganize, and I think that this isn't, we're doing the MOU because we have to make a really smart decision about what we need to pay for in terms of services. Do we really need to pay for more than what we should pay for? But one of the things that the group with the MOU has discussed, and why we really have all 9 municipalities in the county at the table, everybody understands that having a humane society, having that type of amenity in your or near your community is a quality of life. It does provide a service to the community. Centennial, that's one of the things that they struggle with, and Kathy Noon sat right there and said, that's the top thing. We've got this other deal we're doing, and we do this contract stuff, but she said, you do miss that, and their citizens say that is something that they would like to have. And so I think when you do have a strong and a stable, they don't have to be rich, they just have to be able to, run a proper shelter. When you've got that, all the communities are supported by that. And I don't think they're that far away from that, but I think that they're working towards it. They're not there.
And I don't disagree that, Humane Society is a nice, amenity for the community, but is this the right one? I mean, what does it take to really get a new one off the ground that doesn't be hindered by some of these other things?
This is a new one. We got this one off 4 years ago, right?
We've been at this for that long.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, exactly. So there was a new one, right? Do we have a new one, or is that just out of the question?
Well, it wouldn't be a humane society again, because South Platte has that name now. Before it was Colorado Humane Society.
It would be a new humane society.
I think just to go back to what Mike and Joe are getting at, hopefully the board and the management will understand there's a revenue stream that's going to come through the contracts with the municipalities and the county. There's a required level of service that needs to come along with that. It is in a competitive environment at some level as to what we're willing to tolerate. I mean, that's what Joe's getting at. Do we have the right partners on some of that? And we know there's an absolute benefit to the community and from a quality of life about having a facility that's a whole lot closer than Colorado Springs or some of the other locations that could be there. But they've got to have an understanding. So as they're looking at what's the mix of their services, they kind of know what the communities are going to have. We have historical numbers. They understand that, and that's really the sharp pencil that hopefully Leslie can bring to that, is to understand that's they have to hit that. It's not to say that the added part of welfare and dealing with that isn't something that may be desired, but they have to hit the contracted services inside of a revenue flow.
Well, I think that's where the MOU comes out to be the smartest thing we can do, because we're looking at this very much from a service needed standpoint. It's pick up our strays, provide a safe environment for these strays, provide an opportunity for the community to come back and get their dogs, and then beyond that, anything else beyond that is what they will do on their own. Their fundraising, keeping the dogs longer, adopting them out differently, running a spay-neuter clinic, those types of things. That's all what they do, separate from what we have obligation to provide. And so the study is going to give us a very good look at what other options are out there. What are the benefits and detriments of this option, and give us we don't have that right now. We don't know that. So we're going to learn that, then the councils will make a decision.
And part of the MOU, Littleton will take the lead on that, and basically direct the research on that?
Yeah, the members of the 9 municipalities in the county will all, we're reconvening a meeting of that group, and then there will be, from that group, selectees who will serve on that study survey group. And then they'll come back, report to the bigger group, and then everybody will take it back to their cities and share that information.
So part of the goal is to determine what the cost is for the regulatory piece of this, so that we're paying for what is required. That is part of the study group, right? Okay.
Yeah, what is a fair price to pay?
Fair price and not including what their extended services for animal welfare.
Exactly.
Okay.
And to Joe, and I don't know how often to say it, there just isn't another group out there that wants to do this job. And I wish they would stand up and go, and I know we haven't gone out and organized that, but Joe, I don't think our people, I don't think our citizens want to go to Colorado Springs and pick up their dogs.
I agree.
The Golden area does not want us. They don't have room for us anymore. Denver doesn't have room for us anymore. So there's very limited spaces for where we can go. Now, if there would be a new organization out there that would like to say, we can come in and do this, this, and this, I would hope one of these days they would step up, but unfortunately they haven't. And they know some of the trials and tribulations that we've run with our Humane Society, but no one's been willing to step up at this point. And if someone else stands up, I think if this group can't do it, then we have to find something, because I guarantee you, there's nobody in this room that wants to be down there managing this and taking care of it. So, Michael? Sorry.
I just, Phil mentioned this. At some level, I want to remind all the council that this is a contract for service. And in that is the very specific expectation about what the service provider, in this case, the Humane Society of the South Platte Valley, is obligated to provide to us. We have very little and basically zero ability to get into the management, which has been a lot of the discussion tonight. That is not our role. It obviously has played into the conversation. They have come forward asking for additional funds, certainly within the council's right to ask for what's the need, what's causing that. The reason we are initiating the audit is because that's really our only ability to take any action, is to go in and ensure that the public dollars are spent in service of that contract for service. And there is a requirement in there that they meet all state, local laws, federal laws, whatever I don't have the language in front of me, but that's the approach that we're taking from the administrative side. And I would just echo some of the comments on the MOU. I think we have a wide variety of how animals are handled throughout that 10 jurisdiction area that the mayor spoke of. And part of the goal here is there a single governance method that makes sense for those 10 jurisdictions. And the real players on this, obviously, are Centennial, Inglewood, Littleton in particular, because we have the larger amount of dogs in this geographic area, to the extent that you were speaking of how far down do we have to take it. But a large variety of these folks take their animals or handle it differently. And so to the extent that we can come up with a single governance model, and should that governance model be one where we contract for service in a similar fashion to what we have with the Humane Society of the South Platte Valley, we would go to that organization and say, here's what these 10 jurisdictions, would be willing to contract you for. You may ultimately decide in that total that you want to go out for an RFP in that and see if there's others that would want to provide that service in there. So I just want to lay it out that the MOU is intended to come up with that umbrella approach, that if there's a way that we can all agree on, and we are managing that process in the sense that we're bringing it together. It's a collaborative approach. It doesn't say Littleton's in the lead. It just, we are, along with Inglewood, obviously, we are the most impacted at the moment, so we have the most to gain from having this conversation. And then it is a contract for service, and that's all it is right now. And so we are taking our initiating our legal right to go and evaluate those books and ensure that the dollars are being spent appropriately, the public dollars are being spent appropriately. And we will certainly update the council once our finance people get through that and working with Leslie, as the mayor said. So we'll update you guys.
Michael, as I recall, it very clearly stated that Littleton was in the lead and was running with it, which I'm in total support of. I have no problem whatsoever with that.
I can't say I've read the MOU recently. But I know it's intended to be a collaborative approach. So.
City Attorney Kirsten read it, probably wrote it.
She probably did.
And I think Littleton, and I'm all for that. And
Regardless of what it says, you're absolutely right, Jim. We're in the lead.
yeah, well, and the whole the 9 entities, and then the breakdown of basically a commission or a group. This is the first time I've really heard of this tonight. I think you mentioned something in the mayor-manager meeting, Randy. I don't think council has talked about that at all. I don't think. First time I heard about it.
It's outlined in the MOU, the structure of the study and the 6-month thing. It's kind of detailed in the whereases. And the municipalities that are participating in this, the 9 plus Arapahoe, are all currently contracting with the Humane Society. So they are current customers contracting on various different levels. It's all over the map. And that's part of the reason why an MOU will help. We can create some fairness, because it's one thing to charge X amount for this type of volume, and it's another thing to charge that same amount for this type of volume. And so that it's going to create a fairness that's fair for both the shelter and for the cities, taxpayers.
Peggy?
So I appreciate the MOU. I appreciate what Michael said. I appreciate what Joe said. And several of the things that were said was contract for service. So I'm kind of tired of having contract for service where somebody keeps coming back and saying we need more money. Either you have a contract for service or you don't. And I'm assuming Englewood's not rolling in money any more than we are. And we've had to make some really tough decisions. You know, some other things that we might like to fund that we're not funding. And, I mean, I love dogs. I don't have one, but I love dogs. And this is a sensitive topic. But they got to get their act together. Either that or we've got to do something different. And I'm not willing to give them any more money this year. That's me. Right now, even though we didn't ask that question. I mean, we said they may come and ask more. We have a contract for service. Sorry.
Any other questions or comments? Jared?
When is the audit?
I think we're sending them in next week, right? Next week.
And how long is the period of performance?
I don't know.
I'm sorry, the question was how long will the audit take?
That's a long time.
No, I would anticipate that we can probably go through a majority of the books within a week or so once we actually start. They asked for some time because Leslie had just been put in as the CFO or whatever in terms of the financial, and just getting it cleaned up so they could actually provide us that information. But we've got some folks on staff who have done audits before, so we had to, and their budget's not significant, so we had to be able to get through it pretty quick.
This is Littleton staff doing the audit?
Correct.
Okay.
Yep.
And then, as far as the warehouse goes, when does the lease expire?
I don't know that.
I want to say 3 years.
It's a 5-year lease, so it's probably, my guess is.
They've
probably
been
3 years left. I think they have option to extend that, but I think there's a catch-up in terms of lease payments.
And then now, is this new board putting together an operating plan or financial plan for us?
Well, they don't have a new board, but they do have the new chief, or the new facilities operator, Leslie's in there. And that, right now, they're just figuring out what they need to do in terms of when you have a major staff turnover like that. I think the audit will give us what we need to know financially and what they're doing operationally. will be determined as we work through the MOU survey study.
And then also, for health reasons, what is the cost of putting in the drainage system?
No idea.
Cost of what, I'm sorry?
For the drainage.
The drainage system. I mean, if that's cost prohibitive, then councilman may be correct that is this the right partner? If we can't have a healthy environment for these animals, whether it's convenient for us or not, I'm not sure that's the right place to do that.
Well, it is a healthy environment, and they do take very, very good care. What the issue with the drains is that it adds a great deal of work to not have that as part of the facility. Yeah, it just adds more labor intensive. You need more volunteers. And that's basically what it is. It's like if you had a wish list of things around that would make your job easier, that would be the top of their list.
And it seems like if you need volunteers, getting rid of your volunteer coordinator is an interesting move.
I want to reiterate, it's a contract for service, and the way that you guys manage that contract for service is to ensure that they are meeting the conditions of the contract, which we'll look at both from the animal welfare standpoint and from the audit. And to Peggy's comment, when they come and ask you for additional funds, you say no. How they get and whether they're solvent or not, to the extent that they are meeting the obligations of the contract to the moment that they become insolvent, and they can meet the conditions. So I'm going to keep pushing the council back up to this is a contract for service. It is really managed through the dollars and ultimately through the audit to ensure that the dollars are spent in service of the contract, as
So
I've
we
said.
review the contract every year? Yes.
Yeah, you
Yes.
put it in your budget.
And when is it?
No.
When is it due up?
Well, I think actually we haven't renewed it just from a legal standpoint, administrative standpoint. It is an annual contract that requires an action by both councils to renew it. I'm having mic problems. And I don't believe we actually renewed it. We are obviously paying, so there's probably an implied contract at this point, but it's an annual contract, so I don't know when we originally initiated it. We could certainly check and get back to you on that. You're welcome.
And I would just, not trying to pick a fight with my manager, but
ding ding.
But I would just say that this group, many of us in here were there when we went through the demise of our previous Humane Society, and that was painful. And both of these municipalities threw $100,000 into creating a new facility. We, pardon the pun, have a dog in this fight, and while we may be contractual with them, we have made a substantial commitment of our community's dollars to see this place be successful because we recognized its value. And while I don't think that throwing good money after bad is ever a good idea, I don't think we're there yet. I think that we have a facility that has a great opportunity to succeed. I think that they are moving in a much better direction than they have for the last few years, just trying to find their leggings. They're establishing themselves in a number of areas of fundraising. They've got pockets of money, places where they can pull in money from donors. They're building that type of thing up. And so those are the things. It takes a long time to do it. The Denver Dumb Friendlies is 110 years old. They were not successful, as they are now when they were 4 years old either. So I just think that while I don't want to keep, obviously we voted to halt our contract to $50,000, but it is a little bit more than just the contract for service. But that being said, the MOU takes us back to that cleaner, clearer, better relationship where we can cut ourselves away from worrying about whether the spay and neuter clinic's making money.
Well, changing your chairman or executive director it can be good. It's like changing your city manager can be a good thing too. So I'll keep that in mind.
I feel like it's debate time. Let's let's do some fact checks here.
Jim, and we have Linda also.
A financial audit, can we get, can Wilton also or ask for, and they may have these numbers, of where the animals are coming from the municipalities on a monthly basis, similar to what we got last year. I think both councils received something. I think that would be helpful to try and understand where the cost is involved.
Yeah.
Yes.
I think that's one of the things that we were sorely missing was where are they coming from? How long are they staying? Why is it, when are they getting adopted? And how much are they adopting out for? And I mean, there just wasn't a clear understanding there, and it never came around. This will hopefully produce some of that clarity for us.
Gosh, I have to say that this is the most hopeful I have been on this entity. I think the change in some leadership is giving it a whole new possibility. So if you'd asked me 6 months ago if I had any vote of confidence towards this entity, I would have been on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being high, probably a 2. And so I am really, really pleased, and I want to thank you all, particularly from Littleton, and the time that you're spending to try and get us to the next stage. And if this doesn't work, we'll come back with something else, because the MOU will help us with that. I am very, very encouraged. Thanks for the time you've been putting in this. Thank you.
I'm ready for round 2.
Just over the years, operationally, I was involved in this issue because we had many years ago an Englewood Littleton dog pound, then we had a different type of dog pound, then we had the one along the river, and then we, and I watched all the changes, but I watched particularly when we didn't have something, the impacts. And the impacts go way beyond what you would expect. It went to city employees spending hours and hours and hours trying to resolve issues with one dog, and just ways that it's difficult to imagine. And in terms of public expectation, we failed to meet it many times. I remember in those circumstances because we didn't have the right place. So it is in our interest to find the right place and to try to work to do that. The elephant in the room, I don't think we mentioned. Littleton decided not to increase that amount up to $91,000. Englewood did. The discussion that we had in council was very similar to the discussion we're having here. It was that, hey, look, this is a contract for service. This is what you said. We're just not prepared to give you more throwaway money. That was kind of the gist. So we made that decision in our budget process a couple months ago and followed it up with the audit. But Englewood did commit to the $91,000. I want to make sure there's equity.
And when I spoke the first time, our council will have to go back and we will talk about the extra $41,000. I don't think any of them would hate taking off $41,000 and put it towards our budget. So we do not want to have anything unequal than what Littleton did. And Devin and I already talked about this because I said I have a concern that we're paying 91 and you're paying 50. They're going to probably hold that against Littleton and say, well, look, Littleton's paying, or Inglewood's paying 91, Littleton's only paying 50. So,
And Peggy says good luck with that.
thank you. So what I would say to you is we will go back as a council, like I said earlier, and we will talk about this and look at that extra 41,000. And and we can make adjustments. I mean but it is in our budget. But it can also be either delayed or taken off and put in some other area. Peggy, you got any suggestions? We can put it somewhere else, but not Littleton. But so yes, Bruce, we will take a look at that as a council.
Good, because I didn't want that to be, in the press, begins to talk about the disparity and et cetera, and folks would not have an understanding of the issues, just the disparity.
And I think that the MOU, after that's all finished, we will be formulating a price and what the 10 entities are willing to go back with, because we're going to go back as one group and offer one offer. So that could, what we're hoping, would save everybody money and prove a value-oriented decision for all of us. So, and I think the way that we work this typically with them is we don't pay them a lump sum. It's paid, don't you do it?
January and June.
January and June. Okay.
Debbie?
Both?
With all
We
the
pay a whole
different,
$50,000? But don't.
Actually, I think we're paying before January, don't we?
Hello?
For special.
Oh, I just wanted to know, is the building they have now big enough to have that many dogs for 10 municipalities?
Yeah, they currently are serving those municipalities. The only one that they're not serving is Centennial.
Okay.
But they are serving the others. And you were talking like Lone Tree and Parker and Sheridan, smaller
Okay.
numbers of animals. They right now have at least 2 bays of kennels that are empty.
Okay.
They can fit 3 chihuahuas in a kennel.
I saw that. They had a box.
Okay, anything else, anyone? Well, thank you so much to Inglewood for coming. It's always fun to get together and catch up. So, thank you so much, everyone. Have a good evening. Randy, do you have anything?
No, we're okay. Thank you for having us over here.
We're adjourned.